The other thing that the White House has been very active on overnight, sending that 32-page report to Congress explaining why U.S. action in Libya does not need congressional approval. Now, House Speaker John Boehner's office has called the explanation creative. Let's get some insight into this latest confrontation between lawmakers and the White House from Washington executive editor Al Hunt. And Al, in this same report, the White House put the estimate of what's going to be spent as a result of U.S. action at about $1.1 billion. That comes from the Pentagon's budget. Boehner going to go after that money?
Sure he is, Margaret, and he probably has a pretty good case. The administration has really crafted a real consensus among the Democratic left, the Republican right, and many sensible centrists that their policy is flawed and duplicitous. This goes from Dennis Kucinich to Michelle Bachmann to Richard Lugar. They are claiming new authority, I think, in war making, that if it were Republican, Barack Obama would be out there screaming and yelling. This is, I think, not a very carefully considered policy. When they went into Libya on March 19th, they thought it would be over quickly. And 90 days later to come back and say, hey, we're really not in a war over there, is really rankled an awful lot of people from different political sectors.
Now, there was noise made about this when the U.S. got involved via NATO, but I thought the caveat was, because it's NATO action, that they don't need congressional approval.
Well, they say it's not, but they also say because the objective or the mission is not to overthrow Gaddafi. Right. If that happens, that's great. That's what strikes me as really duplicitous. Of course, that's what the objective here is. It is to overthrow Gaddafi. As long as he's there in power, thumbing his nose at the United States, Barack Obama has trouble. And it just seems to me that over 90 days of what clearly is a military action, that it is certainly bad politics and maybe even constitutionally dubious not to go to Congress.
Now, that $1.1 billion that comes from the Pentagon's budget, some of that is going in the form of humanitarian aid. I mean, are we going to see a level of nuance about this argument where you see a reduction in the role or perhaps an end to the U.S. role?
Well, if Gaddafi's still staying there, that means we've really we've declared defeat. Right. That's not a very good policy. Again, I don't know how carefully they thought this through back on March 19th, and I'm also not totally sure how much we should trust those numbers. That 1.1 billion may be a conservative number, but whether it goes for humanitarian aid or military aid, it is quite clear what the objective of this administration is, even if they won't acknowledge it.
Now, I mean, explain how this fits in, though, to the broader White House policy towards the Middle East. I mean, when you saw the changeover with Mubarak stepping down in Egypt, you saw what happened in Tunisia, the Arab Spring, as it was called. There were a lot of calls for the U.S. to be on the right side of history. I mean, in many ways, wasn't Libya supposed to be an extension of that?
Well, it was, and it was the one place where we could intervene, it appeared, safely. One can still make a strong case that it was correct to intervene. I think the criticisms that's coming from a number of quarters is be open about it, seek congressional approval for this. And this is what the administration doesn't want to do. Now, I will say there's a legal action against them. 10 members of Congress, again, going from the right to the left, have filed suit. That's very unlikely to succeed. That'll probably be thrown out by the courts on procedural grounds. The courts like this to be settled in a political venue, which I think is where it should be settled.
Does this become an election issue?
If Gaddafi's still there, you're darn right it'll be an election issue.
What's in your notebook, Al? What are you watching?
You know, everybody has agreed that Michelle Bachmann was a big winner in that Monday night debate. What's interesting is the effect it has on some other people. Tim Pawlenty, her fellow Minnesotan, bad news for him. He doesn't want to compete with somebody who is now viewed as far more formidable in that opening Iowa caucuses. Sarah Palin must be sitting back, whether she's in Alaska or Arizona, warm or cold weather, saying, boy, this one looks like the real deal as opposed to me. And I'm not sure how it affects Rick Perry, the governor of Texas, getting in. It may not be as inviting as it would have been if you didn't have someone from the social right like Bachmann scoring such at least early success.
It'll be interesting to watch what happens. Thank you very much, Al Hunt.
Talk
to you tomorrow.
Thank you, Margaret.